Hey, my neighbors United meeting is starting soon. Privatized your lamp because it's really low light.
Is Theo joining a Scouts meeting?
Yeah, he's got a Scouts meeting 7.
He knows about it.
Yeah. Hi, Jean. There we go. Hi, Tim.
Hey. How you doing, Alex?
Good. Dealing with lighting problems. I'm looking very
Alex?
orange. Yeah, now I can hear you. Maybe I'll just go
You hear me
without.
there?
Hi, Eugene.
Can you hear me there?
Yeah.
We can.
Sound good?
Eugene, how do you pronounce your last
Can't
name?
hear you.
Oh,
Can you say something, Alex?
we can
Yeah.
say something.
So I can say lots of things.
I
Sometimes.
can hear you with the headphones on.
There we go.
Yeah. So
No, I don't.
I'm not the only one with big headphones, so we're brothers
looking like
in headphones.
pros.
Right. I don't know. Sometimes when I do this, I don't need them, but I'm not sure why I need them tonight.
I had to plug in and unplug and plug in again my monitor to get it to work properly.
I mean, as a software developer, let me just say that computers are terrible. Eugene, if you don't mind me asking, how do you pronounce your last name?
Aleci.
Aleci.
Aleci. Right.
Hi, Kristen.
She did not connect to audio.
Now I can.
Oh, at all.
Now I can hear you without my.
Oh,
Okay.
And you can hear me.
Yeah.
yep.
Okay. Well, who really knows how this all works?
Danielle. Yeah.
Hi, Danielle.
That looks like a still life of Danielle.
He is connecting to audio. I wonder if Randy was joking when he said his PowerPoint is the shortest in his life, because it's 11 slides.
Yeah, I would, from my experience with Randy, that would be extreme brevity.
So I guess my email was called for then. Yes.
Well, we knew, I mean, we assumed what you were saying.
Yeah, we're civilians here.
And I mean, if we don't get a lot of citizen participation, we can make the presentations as long as we'd like because it's going to be recorded. But, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But lots of people coming in. Hi, Art.
Well, anyway, I mean, we all expect that this is mostly about hearing what everybody has to say, not about our presentation. So,
Yeah, I think it'll be helpful to hear some of your background. Just,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of people don't understand all of the steps that a new building project goes through, with historical review being a very big component of that in a city of our
Mhm.
age. So,
mhm.
and sometimes I feel like people get notified and involved in projects like when it's kind of past the point of no return almost.
Almost all the time, that seems to happen. I've been trying for years to help the various planning staffers kind of get, anticipate and communicate a little better. But of course, it's not up to me. It's up to them and the mayor and the
Right.
council members. But we didn't, I'll just say that Randy and I did not plan, in the images that we sent you. Of course, we didn't put a lot of content in there about the planning process or the approval process, but we can speak to that, certainly.
Yeah, and we had tentatively planned on Josh Bruce joining us to talk a little bit about, he's on the planning commission. He's an outgoing member, but he was going to talk a little bit from that angle as well.
Yeah. And I think I noticed maybe on Facebook that Douglas Smith is going to listen
Oh,
in.
well, there you go.
So if he's willing to comment, that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
There's another Jean. Hi, Jean.
Hello, how are you, Jean?
Good. Good.
Happy Monday. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right, just double checking.
Yeah.
We are hearing some background noise too, so you might want to mute if you're not talking.
All right, let me take care of that in a minute.
I enjoyed the Dilbert a couple days ago where he's Zooming with a coworker and she's yelling at her husband because he's doing a call on speakerphone. And as always, I show it to Theo, who's 14. And as always, he like doesn't get it. And I'm like, you will.
One day.
One day you will work in an office and Dilbert will become hilarious.
Yeah.
I had to evict my other teenager who was watching All Quiet on the Western Front for class.
Huh.
Did they get the kitchen chores done before the meeting? I know that can tend to be a noisy period for your household.
Well, yeah, no, actually, I haven't heard that start up yet. So, Tim, do you know if many of the other board members are going to join us, or are most people?
I saw that Katie cannot join us.
Yeah.
And no one else said one way or the other. I will be able to take notes if Andrew is not present.
Okay.
Hi, James.
Good evening, everyone.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
We're good.
Good, good. Hey, Gene.
Gene, you're muted. There we go. Yeah.
I'm mutant. Hi.
Yes.
Hey. Is that Jim Dell?
There I am.
Or do we say Dean Dell these days? Or
Well, I've been called many things. Just pick the one that you feel most comfortable with.
yeah. You're not really sitting outside on the campus there.
No, unfortunately, I'm sitting in my little bungalow on Crady Avenue, but that's one of the many pictures I use as my background. Yeah, this one, that's the building that used to be Old Main. It's long gone,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Hi, Josh and Linda.
Howdy.
How's it going?
Going good.
Hi, Josh.
How's it going, Gene? You all right?
Hey, Danielle, I see you've joined us too tonight.
We're just about at the top of the hour. We will give people a few minutes to wander in.
Yeah.
Alex, I guess that PowerPoint was okay.
Yeah, yeah, I got it open.
Yeah.
I can make you host and you can run it yourself if you want, or I can show it and you can talk.
If I mean, if I could run it myself, that'd be ideal. I just
Sure.
not sure.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we mainly wanted you to send it as a backup just in case something went weird.
Yeah. Okay.
Comes Randy.
I'm sure you know more about this than I do, Tim, in terms of the logistics of this. Randolph.
Hi, all.
Hey, Randy.
Hello.
Hey, hi.
Greetings.
Hi, Alex.
Hi.
Another Alex.
Oh, now we have, is it iPhone or is it Android? It's iPhone and Android.
Hey, it's Carl.
Oh, Carl, your iPhone.
Carl is always iPhone.
Yes.
Hey guys.
Hi,
Andrew.
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 Andrew, I like that color of green behind you. You could use it as a green screen if you wanted to.
Nice.
It always loads it as iPhone, but I just got to change it, you know?
There we go.
Hi,
Now
Sammy.
that
Hi,
is-
Never
Steve.
been inside Andrew's house, but that's kind of the color I always expected him to have in there.
It does complement his glasses.
Thank you.
It does.
Hi, Kate.
Hey.
Okay, we have a pretty good crowd. Should we go ahead and get
Yeah.
started? I'm sure folks will continue to filter in regardless.
You have prizes
well-
for the farthest away arrivals?
It's just
No prizes for that. Welcome, everybody. This is welcome to the Neighbors United meeting. We're going to be talking tonight a little bit about how real estate projects happen in the city, and then specifically about the project that the hospital is looking to do to redevelop a 3.5 acre site where the old YMCA used to be, as well as a couple of other properties. Before we talk about the hospital project, we had for a long time wanted Josh Druce to come on and talk a little bit about the City Planning Commission. And so when Randy Harris approached us to talk about this hospital project, thought it might be nice to kind of put those two topics together, mainly out of the idea that Josh can kind of give us some of the theory of how some of these projects get started within the city. And then Randy can talk with his team a little bit about some of their research about this hospital project. And then we're looking to kind of get some citizen opinions about what we think of this project going forward. Before we get started, Josh, can we maybe go around and just introduce yourself, say your name, what block you're from, and then if you're here representing any sort of group, say what group you're representing. My name's Tim Friend. I live on the 200 block of New Holland Avenue. I'm here representing Neighbors United, and I'm also with Lancaster Cemetery. Alex?
I'm also on the board of Neighbors United and also on the board of the Lancaster Cemetery. I see Tim on Zoom quite a lot these days.
It's true. Eugene?
Yeah, Jean Aleci. I live at the corner of West Orange and Charlotte Street. So I'm an Auslander with your group, but I've watched from a distance. I've watched as your group has coalesced over the years and been impressed and pleased to see it working effectively. I'm an architect and planning and urban development preservation consultant. I'm going to be speaking to some of the issues about the proposed development. And of course, very interested to hear what Neighbors United has to say about it.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
Kristen.
Had to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep.
Okay, good. Hi. Kristen Thomas. I live in the 600 block of North Jefferson Street and really interested in hearing what LGH's plans are for that property. So
Sounds good. Danielle? Danielle has been muted, so she might
Hold
be
on.
busy. Oh, there she is.
Then I unmuted myself, but had to take the earpiece out so that I could talk.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I actually live in the 700 block of North Franklin Street, but I'm attending this evening as a preservation consultant for the Historic Preservation Trust of Lancaster County.
Cool, thank you.
You're
Art?
welcome.
Arthur Morris. I live at 434 West Chestnut Street, and I'm an interested citizen, and I've been involved with Randy and Jean, a few other folks looking at this particular project, and quite interested in it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Jean?
Steve Garner here, 200 block of East New.
Steve, you've started. Let's keep it going. Oh,
That's Steve.
Jean, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jean Weglarz. I live in the 500 block of East King Street. I have also served on the City Planning Commission and had the privilege of chairing it for several years. I had a part-time job with the East King Improvement District, so I'm somewhat familiar with neighborhood advocacy and various issues that we'll be talking about tonight.
Great, thank you. James?
Hi, I'm Jim Dell. I don't actually live in the city, I'm sorry to say. I live in Millersville, but I'm here tonight representing the Preservation Action Committee of the Historic Preservation Trust of Lancaster County.
Great, thank you. Josh?
Hey guys, I'm Josh. I live on the 800 block in North Lime Street, so I am a Northeast resident. And as Tim had introduced, I am a planning commissioner as well, currently the vice chair for Lancaster City Planning Commission.
Great, thank you. Linda?
I think I'm unmuted. Yeah. Linda Aleci. I live with Jean Aleci on the west side on Orange Street. I'm an historian by training. I do a lot of work on Lancaster's history as well as its, I have a secondary field in public policy around urban planning. This is my assistant, Samson, who will be probably joining us tonight. And let's see, what else can I say? That's enough.
Thank you. Randy?
Oh, okay. It's like Hollywood Squares. You're going around all these.
It is. We're going around.
Okay. Randy Harris. I live on 300 block of West Chestnut Street, and I'm the former director of Historic Preservation Trust of Lancaster County, and several of the folks in our group are formerly affiliated and with that organization. And I guess, we've been kind of organizing around bringing this issue to public discussion. I'm a preservation consultant. I'm an independent.
Great, thank you. Alex?
Hi, my name is Alex Otthofer. I live on the 300 block of West King Street. I'm not a Northeast resident, but I enjoy following different projects going on in the city, and I like to hear about what's going on. I'm a concerned city citizen, and then here's Chris over here. We live together at 300 West King.
Great, thank you. Carl?
Hi, Carl Feldman. I live at Northeast resident, 500 block of Reynolds Avenue.
Thank you. Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Whalen, and I live on the 500 block of North Shippen Street. I'm also a member of the Neighbors United Board.
Thank you. Sammy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sammy Volrath. I am on the 400 block of North Duke Street. I previously worked for LHOP, and I now work for a statewide housing advocacy group. So, very interested in the housing component of this project and being a neighbor of LGH.
Great, thank you. Kate?
I'm Kate Brand, and I live on Lemon and New Holland, and I am married to Tim Friend, and I also work at the Lancaster City Visitor Center, so glad to be here.
Thank you. Kendra?
Hi, Kendra Saunders. I'm on the board of Northeast Neighbors United, and I live on the 100 block of East Clay Street.
Thank you. Moira Jean?
Hi, I live on the 100 block of North Mary Street. I'm the retired owner of Here to Timbuktu, and I've cared about Lancaster City's development since 1984 when I came and moved here, and have loved it ever since. So I'm always concerned.
Great, thank you. Christine?
Yep, Christine Minnick, and I live on the 200 block of East New. So wanted to know what was happening. And I also do a lot of history research.
Thank you. Kim? I think Kim might be Steve.
Yeah, Kim Stoltzfus and Steve Garner. We're on the 200 block of East New.
All right,
and
sounds
I work
good.
at LGH as well, so I'm interested. And Steve's on the board of Neighbors United.
Perfect, thank you. So with all that said, like I said, we're going to start a little bit with Josh. He was going to tell us a little bit about the Planning Commission and its role in some of these projects. Josh, are you ready to take the floor?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have much of a defined Planning Commission or presentation, so I will be brief and answer any questions. And it comes along with a little bit of an announcement. We've been, I guess, discussing or planning on having me come and speak here for a couple of months. And in that time period, my personal situation has changed. So my term as a commissioner ends at the end of this year. I mean, this month as well. So I had alerted the mayor that I will not be taking a second term as a planning commissioner. Unfortunately, at some point, I will have to be moving out of the Northeast. I got married a year ago, and the space requirements in the school district requirements that my stepchildren have don't quite fit with my current house on Lime Street. So I'm just going to be moving over the border, but I'm still very sad about no longer being a Northeast resident. So I will still discuss overall the Planning Commission, but there will also be a vacancy. And the city is currently looking for somebody that would be able to fill that either on a permanent basis, or very shortly we will have alternate members. So if for some reason you're interested in planning but not able to make the regular time commitment, that would be another way to stay involved. So with that said, the Planning Commission in Pennsylvania, and I'm not a attorney, but by and large has two primary responsibilities. The first is to approve plans that come before them. And for the most part, that's sort of the mundane day-to-day process of the job. Planning commissions have a fair amount of leeway to what can be approved by the staff versus what comes before them. And in most of Pennsylvania, planning commissions are only a recommending body where they then send it to the governing body. In our case, that would be city council. In the city of Lancaster, we're one of the few where the planning commission itself can actually approve plans. And when a plan comes to the commission, at that point, it is the determination is, does it fit the ordinance or not? And if there are items that don't fit the ordinance, are they reasonable? And that's the legal leeway. Unfortunately, I think a lot of times plans will come up and people will show up and oppose them, or want some sort of concession. Unfortunately, it's oftentimes too late, which brings us to the second part. In addition to approving plans, the Planning Commission is responsible for updating and maintaining and making changes to the ordinances where necessary and appropriate. And the ordinances include the stormwater management ordinance, the zoning ordinance, and the subdivision land development ordinance. So for the most part, the opportunity for residents is to try and become a part of setting the rules. Once the rules are in place, developers have the right to kind of play by the rules. So the Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Code then has acknowledged that regular citizens off the street generally don't have strong opinions about technical details and ordinances, setbacks and density requirements and those things. So they also require the municipalities at a minimum of every 10 years go through a comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive planning process is exactly designed to allow regular citizens and really any other stakeholders to come together and take a view of land use in their municipality and set plans for how that should be governed and implemented over the next 10 years. Some areas do it a lot shorter. We, unfortunately, it's been since 2007 since we've done our last comprehensive plan. And obviously we're not going to finish in 2020. But the planning process for that has started now too. So I expect in 2021, there will be plenty of opportunities for public engagement and comment. I would encourage everybody to get involved in that. Or if you are looking to join the Lancaster City Planning Commission, that would be a really great opportunity to, I guess, have more of an impact than you would in other years when they're not going through the comprehensive planning process. So Tim, I hope that answered some questions. I kind of feel like I rambled a little bit, but I'd love to turn it over and see what questions you guys have.
Sure, I didn't realize that you were stepping down because you were moving away, but you'll always be a Neighbors United Emeritus member. You're always welcome at our events.
Thank you.
If somebody is interested in joining the commission, I know, will they be looking for somebody in the Northeast specifically, since that's the spot that's being vacated?
Yeah. So there are currently a few openings. I advocated that we change the map, but the Planning Commission is made up of 9 members. 6 of those come from predefined geographic regions. Those geographic regions, as near as I can tell, aren't consistent with anything else. They're not based on the wards, they're just unique to the Planning Commission. And one of them is pretty much just the annex to the east of the city, which doesn't have a ton of people. And so that remained vacant for a really long time. So I think that the map will be changing, but for the time being, it's just Region 3. And Region 3 is essentially just the Northeast.
And follow-up question, if somebody in the neighborhood is interested, are they welcome to reach out to you to kind of get a feel for a day in the life of commission member?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Great.
So Douglas Smith at the city would be the contact person.
Great.
Officially, if there's somebody that would like to reach out to me, I'd be happy to make that introduction. And if anybody has any questions, I don't know, I got a lot of opinions. So if anybody on here does end up joining, I'd be happy to share those opinions with you.
Do we have any questions for Josh before we move on to talk about the hospital project? All right, thank you, Josh.
Hey,
That was very
Tim, this
helpful.
is, I do have
Carl.
a question.
Sure.
Josh, can you give just a brief update of the subdivision and land development ordinance changes that either happened or are happening imminently? Because there's some interesting stuff in there that I think people would be interested to hear about.
Maybe I disagree on what was interesting. We had some zoning changes in the last round, and for the most part, I think we had held off on saldo changes for the comprehensive plan. I know we had done a couple of things to try and increase bikes, and then late last year, we made a very incremental increase to try and allow, make it easier for one to multi-unit conversions.
What ended up happening with the ADU, just the alternate dwelling units?
Yeah, ADUs are allowed by right in some zoning districts.
But not the whole city.
No. I can actually tell you. I have the.
And then, since somebody else had another question, I'll just ask one more, which is, so I'm reading the minutes from the last meeting, or it's usually like 2 meetings behind because of the time it takes to approve the minutes. But I live very close to New Holland Avenue, and Drums, etc., is being replaced from a commercial site to a residential site. They're going to put 22 units on the site, which is pretty interesting. I didn't realize they had that much space, but I guess they do. And there was a really robust discussion on the Planning Commission about what people felt like was appropriate for the rate to charge for the units they want to build. And I think it was Douglas Smith who said, well, we really have to do what the Pennsylvania Municipal Code says here. And you guys can choose to say something else, but it doesn't really matter. And I was wondering if you could talk about like what went on in that vote and what Douglas Smith was getting at.
Yeah. Well, so I guess if I could address both those questions, maybe from a higher level without telling you exactly what zoning districts ADUs are allowed in. This city has primarily been built out in the early 1900s, and our demand base has changed. Family formation is a lot lower and decreases year over year, and family unit sizes is projected to be even smaller going forward. So houses were built with the expectation of needing the space for much larger families than we currently have. So one of the incremental ways that we're trying to make sure that the built environment reflects the way people are using them is to incrementally increase the density. And I, for example, when I bought my house, I live in just under 1,800 square feet. When I moved in, it was just me and my cat. I had a finished attic, and I probably went up there 10 times, and about half of them was just to go, man, I haven't been up here in a while. What is up here? Had I had good quality, smaller units, that would have been more appropriate to me, and then my house would have been available for someone else. Sort of one of the larger factors going on is the topic of affordability. And affordability is obviously very complicated and I guess very emotional for a lot of people. So the commission itself has had a number of conversations about how to increase affordability. And there's been some disagreement about that. With the particular project that you mentioned, my expectation would be that increasing the total number of units would in some way put downward pressure on prices, and specifically rental prices. The academic term, even though the units are maybe above what the average rental rate is now, I guess the academic term for that would be filtering, where even high-priced units free up affordable and market rate units further down the chain. The changes filter through. The real problems with that you see in other markets with gentrification and specifically displacement is when either affordable or older units are then changed and people are displaced from communities and neighborhoods. It's my personal opinion that as of yet, we haven't seen too much of that. And displacing like a drum store or retail use for residential isn't really the same thing as displacing, poor dispossessed people for, luxury condos. I would not say that my opinion is universal amongst the commission. I would not say that there's a consensus on that matter. So that is certainly something that will be discussed much further in the future.
It was a very interesting discussion, even in the minutes. So I'm sure it was very interesting at the time. Thanks.
Yeah, well, and unfortunately too, the MPC, to Douglas's comments, doesn't allow the planning commission to deny a plan because of prices. When a plan comes to the planning commission, you have to approve it as to whether it meets the ordinance or not. And there's a fact-finding component that's supposed to be used for the planning commission to change the ordinances as appropriate. But you can't ask about prices and then turn down a plan because of prices. They could appeal, and the case law to turn over that decision is very strong. So in some ways, I have concerns as well that those discussions that are fact-finding in nature and supposed to be used for discussions of the ordinances bleed over. And in the event that somebody were to ask about prices and then the plan gets denied for whatever reason, it unfortunately strengthens the applicant's path for an appeal. So I don't know if that was too in the weeds for the overall discussion, but it's something we're going to see a lot more of in the future, I'm sure.
I just want to add one comment to what Josh said. And hey, Josh, long time no see. Good. In some respects, it's somewhat moot if nobody is going to be there to hold them accountable when they change their plans down the line, as we've seen with several projects over the years anyway. If there isn't affordable housing is great to get an idea passed at the beginning, but then if they decide, we really can't do 10%, project is over cost, we're going to drop it. Asking about the prices doesn't help at the beginning unless there's something to it, like a partner who's going to back out if they don't hold up their end of the bargain. Sorry, I'm spackling, so I'm going to turn off my camera.
I was going to interject, Josh, also, if I may, just in general terms. You can get real involved in the details, but in general terms, I think it's worth noting that planning commissions typically are not really able to display very much variation. They have to always look to the ordinance when they're considering a plan, and if it meets the the terms and details of the ordinance requirements, they're pretty much have to say, yes, it's approved. And there isn't discretion on the part of individual board members very much to interject into plans being proposed, nice ideas or better ideas than what's already prescribed by the rules that they go by. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's limited.
Well, and so the whole process, I guess, from the very beginning, from the conceptual stage, the kind of strategic planning in the planning commission world is the comprehensive plan. And then from there, the comprehensive plan gets implemented through the ordinances. And, you know, whichever ordinances it could be, you know, changes. And then once the ordinances are set, the developers actually implement it. And as Jean had said, a lot of times when people decide to get involved, it's on a specific project. And once the rules are in place, developers implement the ordinances. You can't change the rules in the middle of the game. And a lot of times involvement's either ineffective or, unfortunately, it's been a long time since I've seen it in the city, but people that don't understand the process actually end up with outcomes that are worse than what they intended, because the advocacy was misinformed of the process. That doesn't mean that there's not a place for it. The place, though, is in making changes to the ordinances. And planning commissions are entitled to consider affordability in designing and sculpting the ordinances. Unfortunately, they can't do that once it comes to approving specific plans.
We did have a question.
I see a question there from Sammy as well. How diverse is the city planning commission? So legally, we have to, I say legally, it's not state rule. According to our bylaws and our the ordinance that authorizes the planning commission, we have to have geographic diversity. That is the only required diversity that we have. I'm doing this off the top of my head. We have 4 persons. We have about an even split between men and women. We have a fair amount of diversity on age. And then we have representatives with a fair amount of racial diversity as well. 3, I want to say 5 total persons of color. Thank you, Tim. I'm just making things up.
Well, and that is 5 out of a total of 8. So,
yeah.
All right, thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Randy, would you like to queue up the discussion of the hospital project?
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Well,
when you need presentation permissions, Alex can grant that to you.
Sure thing. Okay, I'll let you know, Alex. Thank you. Like Josh introduced, the City Planning Commission functions in the same way that the Heritage Commission, Historical Commission functions, and that's an advisory capacity to council. And the commission, as we will discuss, is an interpreter of the, along with staff advisement, interpreter of the ordinance, and must convey that direct response back to any applicants that come before them for some type of approval. And it's up to then city council to take the recommendation and decide whether or not to go along with it, because they are, I guess they are considered to be a quasi-judicial body. They can weigh evidence and they can look at a broader set of parameters than the commission does. The commission looks at the ordinance as much as possible by the letter of the law and the statute. With that said, Lancaster City has probably one of the best historic preservation ordinances in the state. And that is a a modicum or a middling standard to reach in Pennsylvania, because guess what? There are 2,500 individual municipalities in Pennsylvania, and a recent study by the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, a independent body of the state legislature, indicated that out of the 2,500, there's about 350 or 60 local ordinances that have any semblance of kind of any protection for historic properties within their jurisdictions. That weak and pitiful record with a constitutional amendment that says for all Pennsylvania residents, we have environmental rights, and environmental rights are on the same par as all other civil liberties that government is not supposed to deny or abridge. And under the umbrella of environmental rights, according to the Pennsylvania Constitution, are historic, natural, scenic, and aesthetic values of the environment. So just wrap your brain around the words of scenic and aesthetic, let alone natural and historic. That is like, it's the environment, comma, stupid. It's like everything. The Pennsylvania Constitution says we have a right, just like the property rights advocates, just like any developer who steps up in front of any citizen body to get any kind of approval, you as a citizen of Pennsylvania can be there toe-to-toe, and your local government is supposed to look at you on equal basis. Regardless of what you bring to the table, evidence you bring up, what you want to explain why this building should be saved or why that natural landscape should be preserved, you have to be listened to with the same degree of civility, legal understanding as a developer who has a fiduciary right in that piece of property that they're trying to transform into whatever they bring before that municipal government. I mean, this is something that really is so fundamental that nobody is really championing us all across Pennsylvania, as far as I know. I've not heard anybody.
And this
speaking
environmental rights amendment has been in place since about 1972, Randy?
71.
71. And it's kind of a really well-kept secret across the state, it seems to me.
Yeah, approved by a 4-to-1 approval referendum of Pennsylvania citizens back then, at the height of the environmental movement, you know, the Earth Day movement. But it's been submerged and supplanted by a lot of judicial and legislative actions. It's kind of suppressed it until some recent Supreme Court decisions in Pennsylvania has unleashed this thing. And if we all citizens want to advance environmental rights, it's incumbent upon us to kind of grab this and run with it at our local level. Okay, so that said, the ability to say no to a developer's application, if there is a due process in place under an ordinance, there is the ability to say no, you cannot demolish, tear down, or alter this historic building because it's too important to this community. It doesn't have to be on the National Register of Historic Places or some state sanctioned list of historic properties. If a municipality says, this property is important for XYZ in our history, in our culture, they can say no to that developer or that applicant who's letting that property go to hell or letting it, wants to turn it into something else that's not appropriate to its historic significance. So, I mean, those are some of the basic things that people don't quite generally understand on a broad scale that we need to discuss as a community at large.
Can I interject another point, Randy, which you didn't really state explicitly? Another very well-kept secret, I think, in the city of Lancaster is that we have a National Register Historic District established since about the year 2000, which comprises about 14,500 properties, all of which are considered contributing properties or structures contributing to that National Register Historic District. So the importance of historic architecture in Lancaster has been of record since that inclusion on the National Register. And what's really important about that is this is not a designation just about things like the courthouse or the Central Market or a monument or the elaborate architectural churches and other buildings. It applies and includes most of the very average, workaday row house structures, which make up a composite characteristic that is the city of Lancaster. So it is everything from Central Market and the Grice building to the 9.5-foot wide row house on East Orange Street.
Or in the case we're talking about tonight, on the southern end of the block of North Frederick Street. Very good, Gene. Thank you. I appreciate that addition for sure. But let's step back a little bit and just think about that district was established in about 1997 in the Janet Stork era, because there was a light bulb that went off when a National Register of Historic Places listed tobacco warehouse on the corner of Lemon and Prince Street was torn down for the development of the CVS. And that watershed moment allowed the citizenry of this community to say, wait a minute, you mean you can tear down something that's on the National Register? And somehow this disconnect was never really appreciated here or anywhere across the country, basically, because something on the National Register has this mythology of sacrosanct protection over it that somehow has trickled down through media, misperceived media perceptions that allow people to think there's some protection. It's what's in your local ordinance that it makes something protective or not. So of the 60 municipalities in this county of Lancaster that's supposed to value its historic culture, its landscapes, it's urban, it's rural, there's only less than 10 or so ordinances in place in Lancaster County that speak to anything of a protective nature of historic properties. But again, we are in a sea of ambiguity here in Lancaster, because we do have the ability to say no when this community decides that it's inappropriate to alter or tear down a particular historic property. And kind of that's where we are at this particular juncture with these properties we're talking about on North Prince Street and Frederick.
And the ordinance that we're talking about in this case is the Heritage Conservation District ordinance.
Right.
Look it up on the city's website. It's all there and detailed legalese.
Exactly right. And thankfully it's there. We have professional staff in Suzanne Stallings to advise the city council and her commission that she operates under, who then advise city council. It's a good system in place. It really is. And Suzanne did a good job on this particular case in particular to bring to the attention of the applicant, that is Hankin Group from Chester County, that there's an ordinance in place that says, number one, an applicant should not allow a property to decline to the point that it subsumes the definition of demolition by neglect. That is long-term neglect of a property because a developer or applicant's plans or a property owner's plans long-term don't see any use or value to reuse that property that just happens to be historic and be contributing to this larger historic district. So there is the very indisputable fact in this case that the applicant has allowed that property to decline to the state of demolition by neglect. And as we pointed out in our letter to the to LGH and with copies to council and others and you guys, the commission really cannot allow this thing to be recommended for approval as appropriate, because the applicant over a long period of time, and now their current development partner, has allowed it to decline to this state of demolition by neglect. It's basically moldering away there over a long period of time, and you cannot use that as an excuse to say that you cannot rehabilitate this property because it's too far gone. So that's really off the table. And so that's kind of where we are at that point, at that facet of this particular ordinance. So let me, Alex, if I could you put up my my slides there, and I'll show you some background, some context we could look at and talk about that in a little bit. And I want to say also,
radio or TV playing in the background.
Jean, do you have a TV on in the background? Jean Weglarz?
No.
Oh, someone does. So Randy, I can make you host.
Okay.
And then you can share your screen.
Okay. I need to call up that particular document though, because I don't really think if I have it launched. I have to have it launched.
Sorry.
Right? Yeah, I should be able to spin that. So I can, how do I get out of stop? I go stop video.
No, down at the bottom, there should be a share screen.
Share screen. Okay, gotcha.
Green box in the center of the bottom.
No, not that. Okay, well, see, I didn't have that launch because I thought you, Alex, were going to launch that for us. Okay, how do I get back to my screen so I can launch that particular file? How's that?
Well, you can minimize the Zoom window.
Speaker, exit full screen. Okay. Uh-huh. There we go. Does it work better for with PDF or with a PowerPoint? Do you know?
It's however you want to do it.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. This is just kind of by way of intro. If anybody wants to, I think you can just do a print screen if you want to capture all of this wonderful information about who we are. Basically, we are an ad hoc group that we came together over when we learned about this particular project, going ahead and realized that there would be this impact on these historic properties. We all started talking to each other and said, would like to step up and kind of concentrate our efforts and see if there's some way to bring about a preservation outcome with this project. So here's the folks that are involved by alphabetical order. No other particular pecking order here. As you can see, there's 2 former directors of the Historic Preservation Trust, 4 architects, professional engineer, concerned citizens. Jean Weglarz is welcome to chime in anytime. She's former member and chair of the City Planning Commission. A lot of former board members of Historic Preservation Trust. So the area we're talking about, just for anybody who needs a little bit of an orientation, if you know these Sanborn maps, they're incredibly wonderful to look at, and they can tell you a ton of information. There wasn't much in the early maps of Lancaster because this was really the outskirts of town up there in the north end. But by turn of the century, it was getting to be pretty developed. And so we're talking about the area where these train lines come in, where the ball yard is now in this section. There were multiple spurs of early railroads that produced an incredible amount of economic development, interplay, transportation, allowed manufacturers to bloom here in this industrial town to make things and then ship them out. But if you look at this one right here, see this line right here, it comes right up against Prince Street, right across from the subject property we're talking about, which is the Railroad Hotel at the corner of Frederick and North Prince. Very strategic that someone would decide to build a tavern, hotel, drinking establishment right there. So that obviously probably drove a lot of this development around this time period. So you see again, for the left, all these train lines coming in here, warehouses, would have been a lot of employment going on there and a lot of reasons for people to want to get a cold beer across the street.
And Randy, just peg that hotel on the map there.
Yeah, sure.
It's right on the corner. Yeah, right there.
The corner is the hotel. And I think this is 1912. So this was infilled by what we call the carriage house at a later date, like 1917 or something like that, right along Frederick. But look, it's mostly vacant in this area here. And note, this is also an interesting private business, Conestoga Traction Company. See right here down below? That's what, that kind of evolved into that PP&L substation that's here now, because that was a big user of electric power in the early days of electric power, the late 19th century, because this is where the trolleys got a lot of their power to run in and out of the city. And that eventually became what we now have is a permanent place of infrastructure of that electric power station there, which is a development issue that, you know, it's a block there on the, I mean, it's a permanence there on the landscape that has to be considered in anything that happens there. The Railroad Depot Hotel across the street, 1868, that's an estimate by, I think one of the consultant who, for Lancaster General and Hankin, who looked at this property and came up with the property record. But the carriage house here is to the left, the main corner property. Now, you know, corner properties always get a big hit because they are prominent, they are visible, they are generally built to be visible, to be noticed, and they're well worn too. So obviously they also get targeted by developers who want to see a better opportunity for that corner. But you got this really interesting, nice, well intact, relatively speaking, good shape building that is a contributing structure to this large historic district that Jean talked about. Opposite view looking west on Frederick Street, the carriage house is right here to the left, and a very intact row of domestic dwellings on the north side across from where the proposed 5-story apartment building will go. So when we wrote back in October to the city council and to Hankin, we wanted to let the folks at Hankin from Chester County know that this city has done a great deal of rehabilitation and incorporating older historic buildings with new development. And there's many, many examples. The Preservation Trust building, the Sainer Ellicott von Hess house from the 1760s was about to be, this was going to be demolished to build this parking garage. But this parking garage was carved out to allow the voices of the people who said, do you know what happened here? This is an incredibly important building, not only for its architecture, but what happened there. The knowledge conveyed there between Meriwether Lewis at the behest of Thomas Jefferson in 1803 to learn how to do survey and navigation technique abilities to chart the entire Western United States was conveyed here in this building. Andrew Ellicott was the state land surveyor at that time and allowed that knowledge to be conveyed at that. So this is a perfect example of how what people and events transcend the physical condition of buildings, because by the time this thing in the 1960s under urban renewal, this building was a men's drinking club. It was painted all white. It looked like hell and no one really cared about it. And that's why it was going to be targeted to be torn down. So anyway, there we go. And then we have the Montgomery House, 1803, 1804, worked well into the Watton Shan Convention Center, new construction, all this new construction woven together. This was going to be torn down too because the developers didn't really know what to do with this building, but some enlightened people decided to advocate for it back then, 1999, 2000, and it was there and it's now a showpiece. And of course, the Thaddeus Stevens, Lydia Hamilton Smith, Kleist building, this is now wrapped around the convention center. And everybody, there was dicey things going on back then, the year 2000, no one knew quite what to do with it. A lot of us were advocating to make sure we preserve these things because of the association, again, beyond the architecture, beyond the physical condition, it's what happened there and who was affiliated with it that made a whole lot of sense to keep these buildings. And a number of us worked together to make it happen, and everybody likes it now. Everybody thinks this is a really cool outcome. And now the last slide I have to share with you is I'm becoming to learn about the Hankin Group, and they are considered incredibly enlightened, community-minded developers, which are a rare breed, you know, in our world today. They, in this case, just north of Route 30, near Exton in West Whiteland Township, on the grounds behind there somewhere, I'm not exactly sure of the site plan, but last year, 2 years ago, they preserved this property. It's 6,000 square feet. There's a big extension off the back of it. You can barely see it. They divided it into two apartments, each of them 3,000 square feet. And I talked to the planning director of the township today. He said they were rented out in a month, or 2 weeks, I'm sorry, 2 weeks after they were put on the market at a very high rate, because they did a really good quality job of keeping this building on site. And they also sustained the barn. They kept the barn for the general maintenance and storage needs of the entire development. So somewhere back here is another 4 or 5 story building, apartment building, like Hankin is proposing here in Lancaster. Again, it's a different, as you can see, it's a rural area. Look at the size of that tree back there. It's a different setting. This building is set offset and could much more easily be preserved and redeveloped and returned to a useful use because it's detached from the larger development. So we're asking them to step up to the plate and be creative like other people have in the community over the last 20 years. And again, do not think about the last 20 plus 30 years of development in this community centered around recycling obsolete buildings, tobacco warehouses. All of these tobacco warehouses are the bedrock of the revitalization and vitality we have in our city today. And that is because enlightened people 30, 40 years ago realized that these buildings could be recycled for useful purposes into the future, and they did. And small businesses occupied these things for retail, for housing, offices, and everything else. And that is really a big part of what makes Lancaster much more competitive, viable, attractive in all of the third-class cities that are in Pennsylvania that are pretty much industrial, postmodern wastelands. Our historic architecture is really, really core to our current generally positive condition. So that's all the preaching I got to do right now, and I will be glad to move on and let anybody else chime in or ask questions.
In case anybody missed that, the Hankin Group is the real estate developer who's been brought into the city to do this project for Lancaster General Hospital. They're the property owner.
Right.
And so this group is in discussions as the developer is Hankin, working for Lancaster General Hospital.
And if I may add, as of a couple of days ago, as a result of the letter we wrote on December 4th, I think, we're having a meeting on December 17th with Lancaster General execs and Hankin folks to hear our pitch on this thing, to have a virtual meeting to get a better understanding of what we would like to see happen and hear their side of it, which will be on, again, the 17th, which is 3 or 4 days before the next meeting before the City Historical Commission, where this thing will be brought up and discussed again. So there's open dialogue, there's positive opportunities here to collaborate, and we hope we can have a better preservation outcome than what's been presented so far. And just to summarize, what's been presented so far is the buildings we're talking about saving are just the corner on the northeast side of Prince and Frederick. The developer is saying they choose not to save them. They don't want to save them. They think it's infeasible to save them. It'll be too much money. I think they're going to come back with a very high price that they will claim is a problem in impeding them from keeping the buildings on site. But we'll have to see if we have a different outcome than that.
If I could just explain a little bit more there. The proposal, I'll show you a plan in a moment. The proposal is to demolish all the existing buildings on this half city block and to build all new construction. And we think there are a few of these historic buildings that deserve to be saved, if not all. And the ordinance, which we referred to earlier, the Heritage Conservation Ordinance, requires that every property owner either maintain and repair these historic buildings or find a way to reuse them in any new development plans. We have a case here where a developer has come into the community, as has happened in the past, and has said, well, we just don't see any way that we can retain these historic buildings. We're going to build all new. So their attitude thus far has been, we expect the Historical Commission to approve because this is a great project for the hospital and it's a big investment in the city and everybody wants housing and so on. But they've just skimmed over the ordinance, the Heritage Conservation Ordinance, which says if there are historic buildings, contributing structures on the site, they are to be reused in some fashion, repaired and reused. So.
Good, thanks, Gene. And again, we want to stop and hear from you folks with questions. And we also want to understand how and when there's been interface with neighbors in general, and also specifically in this area of effect in and around where this big new development is going. And I also want to just make sure you understand, generally we support this development. This is dense urban infill. This is like good stuff. this can turn out really well for everybody. It's just the fact that this one facet doesn't seem to be in sync with city plans, city missions, city goals. And so we're kind of bringing that to the attention of the applicants as much as possible. Jean, as member of our group, you want to chime in with anything?
I'd like to start and show the
Jean
plan of
as,
the
Jean
site.
as in Weglarz, Jean as in,
Oh, sorry, the other Gene.
The other Jean.
Can
She's
you
muted.
unshare your screen, Randy? Randy, can you unshare your screen now
Oh, yeah,
so that we can look at each other?
sure. Stop share.
Yeah, and just to clarify, how many apartments were they talking about going into this development? I think I was reading
over
earlier.
200.
It's 100.
It's
Yeah,
over 200. I think it's 240 or something like that.
Yeah, from an article from a while back, it looks like
Substantial.
230.
sounds about right. It's
Yeah.
five
Yeah, and
five
it's
story
5
small.
stories, most.
And I guess another question.
If
So,
I could share the screen, Alex, I'd like.
Okay.
Gene, while you're getting set up, and this development wraps around to the old YMCA building as well, right? And if I understand
covers the
correctly, like
site.
that's yeah,
It
so,
covers
and
the
that's less
site
of a
the old
concern.
YMCA. Yeah.
Okay.
So Gene, you should be able to share your screen now. See a button at
let's see.
the bottom there?
Yeah. And I have the PowerPoint open. How do I,
At the bottom of the screen, Gene, you see a little green button that says share screen.
right, I'm hitting that, but nothing's happening.
Oh, does someone need to give him permission? Co-host
Oh.
permission?
Yeah. I did.
You have to launch your file, Gene. It has to be.
I have that
Now, go back,
and
share
share.
screen, then hit the file, hit that file. Click it twice.
Oh, there you go.
Click it twice. That's always good advice.
Queen of Zoom.
Yeah. Nothing like lecturing on Zoom.
Let's see. Okay, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So if I can I go back to, well, I just have a few, about 10 slides here to show that a little more detail of the context. But I'd like to actually go right to the end and show you the plan if I can. How do I do that? Yeah. Right. All right. All right. I hope that's well, what I do. Sorry, folks.
From the current slide.
All right. Right, have it. So this just shows you at the top, going horizontally is Frederick Street. The parking area at the left is across Prince Street where the medical center and the baseball stadium is. And on the right, going vertically, is North Queen Street. All right, so you can see all of the colored yellow and blue and gray. It represents the proposed street level retail and commercial spaces, a medical office building in tan at the lower right, a parking garage structure in 2 tones of dark gray at the center bottom. That would be along North Market Street. And then all of the northern half of that block from the electrical substation north and from the parking garage north, that is all proposed to be apartments, some of them quite small. So they're going to wrap around the periphery, Queen, Frederick, and Prince Streets, and they're proposing some courtyards in the center of the blocks, quarter blocks, around which the apartments will have orientation. So just with that in mind, I want to go to the beginning here of these pictures. And just explain, right, okay. So there's the old hotel building, which is proposed to be demolished on the right corner in this view. There's the existing row houses on the north side, go all the way to Queen Street in the distance. And as Randy's explained, this is building is in bad repair, but in basically good condition, needs a lot of attention. Lancaster General has owned it, I believe, since about 2003. So they're responsible for the condition of the building. As Randy mentioned, demolition by neglect is a prohibition in the Heritage Conservation Ordinance, which says if you own a building, you can't let it deteriorate. And then in a couple of years, because you haven't fixed it up, go to the Historical Commission and say, you know, that building is so far gone, we just can't put another 300 or 500,000 or $1 million into it to save it because it's in such bad shape. If it's your fault as the property owner that it hasn't been kept up and maintained, that's defined as demolition by neglect. And so this is what the developer and LGH are proposing on that same corner. I'll just go back and forth a little. They're proposing from Frederick Street here south, half a block, all this new construction. And I've taken the liberty to superimpose the existing building on their building to show you the relative scale differential here. So again, that's what's existing. You can see the hospital in the distance at the center. It's what they're proposing, 5 stories. And compared to what's existing there, that's about what the scale change would be. This is their view submitted to the Historical Commission for the appearance of the building along Frederick Street. On the left is existing buildings along Frederick. That's looking out toward Queen. And they're proposing all this new 5-story construction on the right. So, you know, in my business in architecture and design and urban design, you can make things look pretty fancy and pretty sexy and pretty desirable. But we're also trained as designers to think about real impacts, not just special effects and appearances. And one of the things that urban designers and architects use a lot as an analytical tool is to consider what will be the shadow or shade impact of what's being proposed on the rest of the surrounding environment. We've seen nothing like this presented from this developer thus far in their couple presentations now to the Historical Commission. So I went ahead and over the last couple of weeks created this diagram, calculated the solar angles so that we could appreciate what's existing and how that would change in terms of shade on Frederick Street. So the existing hotel building on the right, the historic structure, will cast a shadow across Frederick Street much of the year. If you see the line that's labeled E, there's a little circle up in the upper right, E, that line indicates the variable shade area. So throughout the year, there's potentially that much of Frederick Street could be in shade at the lowest angles of the sun at this particular time of year here in December. You'll have shade extending all the way over to the doorsteps of the north side row houses, just with the existing structures that are on Frederick Street today. And what's being proposed is a 5-story building, which will actually peak out about 64 feet in elevation compared to the 22 or 23 feet that's presently the height of the structures on Frederick Street now. So it's going to cast a much larger shadow at this time of year when the sun is low in angle. You see that at the top of this drawing, there's a little circle and a P to indicate the proposed shadow lines. And the shallow line, which extends all the way back to the backyards and over top of all the row houses across the street, That will all be in shadow at this time of year and through much of the year, or shade. And the sharper, more steep angle shows that at the highest sun angle of the year in mid-June at solstice, the angle of shade from a 5-story building, 64 feet tall, will reach to the curb line across Frederick Street. So you're going to have shade varying all the way from the curb line to the backyards of the row houses, as opposed to how it is now, where the existing buildings just shade Frederick Street only as far over as the doorsteps. Now, that's not the only issue that I'm concerned about, but you can see the difference in what we call the unobstructed sunlight area there on the existing housing across the street. It's going to really change. The unobstructed sunlight area will shift to much farther back to the north. So we're going to have a permanently, more or less permanently shadowy, shady condition on that street, given the idea of putting 5-story building right up against the face of Frederick Street all along for that entire block. So one of the things that we've suggested to the developer at the Historical Commission meetings is that they consider moving some of the apartments that are proposed in 5 stories right along Frederick Street, moving them to other parts of their complex. That there wouldn't be so much of an issue of shadow if the taller parts of the building were at the southern area, lower down on the page here toward the middle. But by putting them right up against Frederick Street, they're going to create a great deal of shadow and, of course, a rather overwhelming architectural image against the housing on Frederick Street. So it seems to me that if they would, if you look at this plan in the upper left corner, you can see the shadows on the ground there of the hotel building and the carriage house right behind it. It seems to me that if they could save those buildings and also lower the scale, the height of the architecture in that area, and it would be good for everybody. It would improve conditions on the street, and it would save some historic buildings so that we wouldn't have this, which looks like it could be kind of anywhere between New Jersey and Ohio. We would get something that would retain Lancaster's architecture on one of the most prominent corners here. So that's sort of what I have to say just at this moment. Happy to engage in some discussion with the neighbors.
Yeah, thanks. The other Alex Othofer in the chat brought up the potential of setbacks, and I'm also interested in what people here, not just Jean, thank you, but everyone would think about having more setback from the edge. One of the things I find a little bit frustrating in Lancaster are the very narrow sidewalks. Right. How do you have street cafes and outdoor dining, which be a long ass time before I go inside a restaurant. But you know, generally we have very pleasant springs and falls, which you'd think would be all outdoor eating all the time, but there's no space.
Right.
So that's my rant.
And Frederick Street, of course, is one of the narrowest cartways. The street, the width between curbs, it's one of the narrowest streets in the city. It's only about 23 feet.
And so it sounds like you're kind of proposing moving some of the development towards the southern end of the parcel. We'd still retain quite a bit of that 230 apartments, right? I mean, I'm thinking of it from a housing perspective. I want to see people have houses in the city, because in the long view, I think in terms of global warming and stuff, we need to get people walking and living in walkable places. So I would like to see this developed in the city and not in one of the suburbs.
Well, let me
and I was wondering why
again.
They felt like the building had the height side had to be on that north side. Like, I don't know anything about a site issue or something else? I'd hate for them to lose the ability to go 5 floors on the
Well,
site.
if I could, I'll respond to that, Carl. Developers are always looking to maximize what they might call the efficacy of the properties. They want to get as high a yield as possible out of a piece of property. So going up makes sense to them within certain limitations in order to get enough dwelling units that they can see that there's revenue to support the project in the future. We're not suggesting they should lower the number of units. And in fact, we're all in favor of residential development. As Tim mentioned, it's a good thing for the city. And it's a good thing for the region for it to be in the city. But the question is how you configure it. And if they could still keep the 230 or 240 units if they would just reconfigure them on the site in order to get away from displacing the historic buildings on the corner on Frederick Street and creating all that shade and shadow. That's how it looks to me, to us.
If I could step in for a second, I'm always concerned when we have these conversations with developers that it comes across as we want you to do this, but we don't have a solution for you to, let's just say the magic number is 230 units that they feel they need for this project to be viable.
Right.
I also want us to think a little bit about what are value adds that we could give to the project that obviously, like preserving a historic building, everybody knows my opinion on it, is going to add value to the project. But from a different perspective, what are some other things? Like, why can't it go up 7 floors, but each floor is slightly backset from the floor below so that the shade lines don't cross the street as they currently do in Gene's images? And if you have a neighborhood group backing you, maybe you get 250 property or units out of it instead of 230 if we can talk the city into going higher. I just want to make sure we consider how to pitch it to them in a way that they can wind up with a better project from an economic standpoint as well.
The historical commission, 1 or 2 of the members on the commission at the meeting last month suggested this and indicated that it seemed reasonable that the city would probably find additional height acceptable on other parts of the site if it meant that they were saving historic buildings and improving the shadow conditions. And so the ball really is in the developer's court, LGH's court, to come back with a better proposal, which considers the terms of the ordinance, which is save the historic buildings when you can and improve quality of life, not detract from it.
Well, it does seem like the city is not afraid of tall buildings. Reading in the LNP a couple of months ago, the proposal on, was it Queen and Chestnut? They were suggesting 8 and the city said, no, make it 16.
Right, I think it's 16 now that they're talking about there.
So that leads me to ask, would the city be happy with a 16-story tower in the middle of that block, considerably south from Frederick? Or 12 or?
I wonder about the cost implications though. Like I've heard 5 stories is the highest you can go on timber frame or something like that. So I'm not sure it's so straightforward. I also wonder, like, I've seen a couple buildings come around like this where it's like, oh, we didn't really do anything with it. Now it's falling apart. And I get the intent of the ordinance, but I just don't, like, where does that leave us? Like, oh, actually you can't do anything with it that would be profitable and productive. So it just sits. Like, what do we do about that?
We'll make landlords maintain their properties.
Good place to start.
I think there's also a fight with the dioceses. I'm not Catholic, so I can't say that word. The Catholic school, they were talking about wanting to demolish that old house on Duke Street.
Yeah, that was
Taking very
particularly
good care of it.
underbaked, it seems. But I wonder, like, I don't know, I don't know. I don't think like a lot is actually being done, like in terms of how that ordinance is serving the people of the city at this point.
To answer your one question, though, I think there is a little bit of a lack of understanding of the cost of these structures and what goes into them. And that frustrates developers. I'll very often when they go to boards and whatnot and try to pitch projects. And I think it's hard for boards and councils to pitch back meaningful feedback for what they're looking for in a win-win way because of that lack of understanding. I'm fortunate that I've gotten a bit of an education here working with Carlisle and Henry as clients over the past year and a half, working on large structures and making them more environmentally friendly. And boy, I've learned a lot about what goes into these structures from a cost perspective and why 5 stories is one of those magic numbers for why they're considering that. But I would push back and say that there is such a thing as private-public partnership, and projects can be made bigger if the right proposal of partnership is brought forward to really get them to that better level if there's more of an understanding.
And I have some questions regarding like impact and kind of the overall scope of the project. LGH has a lot of the real estate in my particular part of town on like Duke Street, Frederick. What truly is this project going to have on the community overall? Like, yes, it's adding housing, but like the affordability of it, is it going to just be bringing in new people to the city to be able to live here? Or is there going to be opportunities for lower wage earners at LGH to rent these properties? I know Josh had mentioned affordability isn't something like the planning commission can inquire about, but really, like, what are we gaining as a community with this project other than just adding more housing units into our stock? I'm not quite sure.
I can answer to that to some degree. The developers will correctly tell you that there's going to be a significant influx of tax revenue because it's a private development. It's not going to be LGH nonprofit, and there'll be jobs. Like all developments, especially these kind of grand scale developments, they will talk about construction jobs and permanent jobs, and in this case, mixed use, mostly living spaces in the urban area, with all of which are positive, and tax revenue from that. So those are some things that they have in their quiver, their portfolio to advance. And we say, all good for that. And that's all, they're also looking at it as they need this housing and this quality of life that they see being generated here to attract the kind of people, the workforce that they want to have in the hospital. So that's very significant for sure.
I was wondering about some of those properties being used as short-term housing. In getting to know some of the medics that work in the hospital, I've learned that doctors and nurses are often working 3 or 6 month contracts, and then they're like from New York, they're in Lancaster for 6 months, they go to Georgia. It's really an itinerant. It sounds terrifying. I would hate doing that myself, and I'm a traveler. And some of these people are living way out Old Phillip Pike or
I think
up
that's
in
part of the
township.
idea why the hospital wants to develop residential. I assume that it's going to be advantageous, for their employees.
And Gene, could you
there's
pull up the floor?
employment all around this site? There's the behavioral center, the hospital, this new medical office building. There's a lot of employment all around it. It makes sense.
One of the notable features of this particular development, in my mind, was the number of studio apartments that they're planning on each floor. So I'm suspecting that that's exactly the audience they have in mind. People who are going to be short-term lessees, or someone's going to buy these apartments and rent them out, sublet them to for these short-term stays. I really can't see why else we would be building so many studios.
Yeah, they're going to be probably young single professionals who are tied to the hospital for employment.
I mean, more than just the hospital, I think there's a demand for that size unit anyway. And I think most of the new construction in the city has been, you know, 1 unit or even studios in the last, you know, immediate history. I guess if I could jump in, I guess big picture, I very much support historic preservation. I would like to maintain the character and nature of Lancaster City, the walkability, the street wall, just the nature of it can't be recreated. And all you have to do is cross the bridge into Manheim Township and see all of the problems with modern development. But how do you guys, I guess, balance that, the need for historic preservation versus the need for cities to grow and change? And I think it was Randy's presentation. He showed the Sanborn map. The entire neighborhood there has changed. And it makes sense that a tavern would be viable when there's employment and rail across the street. But the nature of that neighborhood and the context of it has changed. I mean, primarily with the baseball stadium across the street, but you know, the street wall isn't there, the utilities there on the other block. It's impossible for me to think that it'll return to being a walkable neighborhood tavern like it started out.
Well,
Even
putting a
with-
couple hundred residential units on the street, even if they're up at 3, 4, 5 floors, that is going to create a lot of walking traffic in that environment that doesn't exist there now.
And a lot of people who don't have to drive home.
Right. Can walk across the street down the block to work.
And they are intending to build resident or commercial property right at the bottom on the street level.
Right.
They're intending there to be retail. So and there's, except for the parking garage, which I imagine is going to be for the residents and for the you know, employees of LGH, there's not going to be a whole lot of place to park there.
Right.
And it is, you know, the baseball stadium is there, and at least on those days where there is you know, there are baseball events or events in the stadium, there are a lot of people that walk around in that neighborhood. And I think destinations on the street level would attract people there. So, you know, my opinion is, you know, a representative of the Historic Preservation Trust is that it's really incumbent to do as much as we can to ensure that properties that can be saved are saved and incorporated into the fabric of the city. Because I think, as Randy well said, if you look at the other third-class cities in Pennsylvania, Lancaster really sticks out because we have done such a good job over the last couple of decades in preserving the fabric of the city to make us look as a unique destination. You know, we're not just another cookie cutter little town where people come, you know, and then they leave. People come to Lancaster, they love it here, and they love it largely for the ambiance of the city. These kinds of properties are finite. You know, every time we tear down one, there's one less that we will ever have. And you know, the story of development in the city has been the same, you know, since the 1960s. The narrative is always the same, and you'll see it everywhere, that it's too expensive to save historic properties, new construction, that we need to stimulate economic development, and the best thing that we can do is just level blocks and build new. We're not trying to stop anything here, you know, but if we want our city to continue on its vibrant path, we have to make sure that we do what we can to help preserve its character. And I don't think it's a big ask to ask them to consider incorporating this corner property into the design of this development. When we were involved, the Historic Preservation Trust was involved with the Queen and Vine Street development, the development of the convention center. The logic was the same then, that they just wanted to, the then mayor, not you, Art, but you know, Charlie Smithgall once told me that if he had his way, he'd just bring in the bulldozers one night and flatten the whole block, right? And start fresh. But then we would just have one more convention center that looked like every other convention center in the world, rather than one that really incorporates the history of the city into the fabric, you know, of the building, of the development. And it is, I think, contributed, the historic preservation that happened there contributed to the economic development that we've seen, since that convention center went up, since the Wat and Shand was transformed from, being a derelict to being, really a focal point once again of the city. So
for those who weren't here during that time or weren't paying attention, that was about a 5 or 6 year battle, a tug of war, public relations battle to convince the convention center proponents and the city at that time too, that something more than just a big new structure could be put there. And eventually, they conceded and some of the historic buildings remained. And ever since the project got finished, the talk has been about how great it is that there are these historic buildings that are part of the Marriott, part of the convention center. It's very unusual. They themselves use it as a marketing draw, comparing that convention center to those in places like Philadelphia and Washington and Baltimore.
If,
and we
if I
have to
could
learn
add some,
the past.
may I speak, make a comment? If I
Go,
may?
Marge.
Just a little perspective here. Lancaster has done a lot to try to accommodate the hospital. It would be interesting to have a Sanborn map look over decades of how much property the hospital has taken, and how many buildings have been demolished, and some pretty marvelous buildings, in order to expand the hospital and put parking garages in. So I think this city has tried very hard to be responsive to the needs of the hospital. The hospital has some responsibility, on the other hand, to be kind of sensitive to what the city needs and what will add to neighborhoods and what will not hurt neighborhoods, and how their projects fit in with adjacent neighborhoods. And with the ordinance that we have, it seems to me they're the ones that should be incumbent upon them to try to have this property fit within the neighborhood, make it an asset, save what I think is a valuable property, and be neighborly. I think the most important thing to me really is to see if the people to the north of this site in that neighborhood finds out what is really happening and whether they're really interested to get really involved in the project and make comments, because they're the ones that are going to be facing the biggest impact. I live over at 434 West Chestnut Street. I think we should save the tavern. I think it's the right thing to do. But I've got plenty of places to go to within 3 or 4 blocks of where I live. I walk around that neighborhood. I was around it this morning. I take long walks. I think it's a real asset to the community if it would be restored and made into a place that neighbors can go, as well as the people that will move into this new project. So, you can see I'm hopeful that the hospital will do the right thing, make some adjustments, maybe invest some of the money that they make each year. Some years they make $100 to $200 million a year. They don't call it making money. They call it what's in the bottom of the balance sheet that year. But they, I think, have significant responsibility as, in my mind, in some ways, they're not profit making, but many ways they are, to do something right in this particular case. They're going to get a lot out of this project. And I would hope that they will do the right thing. So my appeal is to them as much as anything, and to the neighbors to the north, with hopes that they get involved and speak their mind.
So, and maybe that's a good point to interject and say, what are the next steps for citizens who would want to make their voices heard? Like what is your group's call to action for the neighbors in the local area?
May I take that, Tim? Jean Weglarz? Yes. The next step would be to have as many of you as can participate in the Historic Commission meeting on December 21st. That evening will be the response back from the developer and the hospital based on the November meeting, basically where they were told, we need to see you prove to us that you cannot reuse the tavern and the carriage house, along with a number of other issues. But in the bottom line, the ball went into their court. they have to come back, and that meeting will be very important. The process is any request for demolition goes through the Historic Commission on an advisory basis to City Council. We are hopeful that the Historic Commission will in fact recommend denial of the applicant request to demolish these buildings. There are a few other buildings that they also want to demolish that probably will be allowed. The ones over on Queen where the Owl Hill Learning Center is. But this particular building, we expect and hope that the Historic Commission will say, no, we do not recommend that the certificate of demolition be permitted. However, that can be overturned by City Council. So it's going to be a multi-step process, and having citizen input from your group in particular, more specifically, as Art said, from those immediately around this site, but your neighborhood group can speak, is going to be very important.
There's also the possibility, Jean, I think we should mention, there's the possibility that the hospital and the developer could get this message, reread the ordinance, and understand that they ought to at least try to save some of the historic buildings and integrate them into a better plan. And that's really the intent of the ordinance. The intent is not to say, no, you cannot demolish things. The intent is, let's make a better plan that saves buildings and incorporates them into the new. So they could do that, but they're going to have to hear the message in a unified way from the community, and the hospital is going to have to say, yes, all right, well, we think that's probably a good idea. Let's see if we can save some of these historic buildings.
Absolutely. And some letters to the editor, if any of you folks are inclined to write a letter to the editor to keep the topic in front of folks, that's also a strategy. Absolutely. Be better if they come back on the 21st and say, we agree, here's how we can reuse it.
May I ask a question about parking?
Sure.
As far as adding the 230, not everybody's going to have a car, and they're expecting them majority to be LGH employees. But if someone else would rent an apartment, they're going to do street parking, and there's already not a lot of parking. Or is there any kind of plan as far as connecting these to, the bus system or any others, like putting in a bus stop anywhere in this location like that, or any kind of extra parking? Is there a plan in that or in the process already?
There was a garage in the plan, right? And that it would be a new garage?
Yes.
Yeah.
How many cars will that new garage hold?
Truthfully, I haven't been paying close attention to that. My impression is that the garage is there for the medical office building that's on the site in the lower right corner on Queen Street, as well as some of the residential and retail and commercial uses. But I don't know what those numbers were. We can certainly find that out.
Because in my experience, the general pattern seems to be every adult has a car. Yes, there are exceptions, but like my household, 2 adults, 1 car, but we're wackos who've lived in Europe for a while.
Yeah.
Most Americans, if you don't have a car, you're not an adult. And that's my observation. That's not an ideology.
My guess is that they aren't building a garage unless there's at least a couple hundred spaces in it,
Yeah.
It's not economically very feasible unless it's at least a couple hundred spaces. But I don't know the detail, to answer Christine. I don't know the detail of, how that parking is assigned or what they're anticipating. We were, talking about the big gross issues of numbers of stories and numbers of units and saving buildings. But I'm sure we can find that out.
Can I add another dimension to this thing? I'm at the risk of getting too bureaucratic or whatever, but 10 years ago, I guess it was, maybe more, when the Armstrong site was torn down for all new development to occur there, and the railroad yards were torn up, That was all public funding from federal and state resources that came through F&M and LGH to be co-partners in that. Basically kind of a neo-urban renewal kind of thing. Let's tear down this stuff that's no longer viable and create something new on cleared land. But there were historic properties on that. The Armstrong site was a major historically significant industrial facility. Architecturally, what it meant to the community, who had jobs there, how it impacted generations of people in this community. All of that had to be considered, and there had to be offsets against the loss of those buildings, so-called mitigation of the loss of those historic buildings. So what happened was the partners, the County Redevelopment Authority, Economic Development Company of Lancaster, City of Lancaster signed an agreement that in order to receive that massive amounts of public funding, $35 million, I think it was, I can't remember the exact number, there has to be this, whatever this so-called mitigation or offset. And so they agreed, there's a document that says that LGH and F&M agree to support historic preservation activities in the city of Lancaster in exchange for getting those dollars that converted that land into more usable, functional property on which to build. So we're going to bring that up to the applicant at our meeting as well as to city council, because this thing has been kind of under the radar. No one's really kind of looked at it for 15 years, what it means, who's legally bound by the terms of that. It's a very, very interesting document that connects to promoting housing affordability and housing opportunities and preserving the quality of Lancaster's heritage, its architectural heritage. So those are the same issues we're talking about that we need to get our brains around as a community and see if we can come up with a better outcome.
They negotiated an agreement, LGH, F&M, city, and those other agencies, an agreement that said that in the future, they would participate in other efforts to save historic architecture in the city, right, Randy?
Well, more generally than that, to preserve, to support historic preservation initiatives in the city, which is very broad.
Right.
So we would like to interpret that as a commitment to the exact same thing we're talking about here. That it should be. Let's try everything we can to preserve these buildings, and when everybody kind of consensus agrees that there's maybe not a way to do it, then we go ahead, but not right out of the gate. Let's tear down these buildings and build, something new that fits our template.
To go back to the question of parking for a moment, I just looked at the renderings again. They are intending this to be a 5-story parking deck, and it looks like there'll be about 80 spots per floor. So somewhere between 300 and 400 parking spots, although they don't actually mention the number in the report they submitted.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
A few minutes ago, we were talking about how to get the word out. We're an hour and 40 minutes late for me to really say this, but we are recording this meeting and we will be posting it to our YouTube channel later. Click like and subscribe and all that stuff, but then also share it with your friends if there's relevant stuff in here that would help you get the word out about this project.
Thanks.
That's great.
Any other questions?
I guess I'm still not entirely sure the value of this project. And I'm not sure if it's a misunderstanding of this particular building and what makes it historic, or if it's broader than that. And, it's a distinction between, my view of historic preservation versus other trade-offs. So I guess my question would be, is there something particular about this building, or is the idea that we do not change the streetscape in Lancaster City at all?
Can I answer that?
Please.
Okay. It's not the fact that nobody wants to change the streetscape. It's the fact that these buildings are, because of the big historic overlay district that they were discussing in the beginning, the Heritage Conservation District, which is less restrictive than like the Harb district, which is more of the downtown, where you have to have approval for like the type of lights or and more exterior changes. We're in this neighborhood, we're allowed to change our doors or our windows without a lot of oversight from the city. But if we want to add an addition or we want to demolish something, then that's when the city comes in with oversight. So because it's in this larger historic overlay district, because they want to demolish them, they have to get special permission for that. But the other part of that is that it's all of the they do surveys in this and those buildings are listed as contributing to the historic character of the city. So that's one of the reasons that, so it's not that nobody wants to change it, they're actually asking them to incorporate them into the building much the way that the Thaddeus Stevens or the Montgomery House are incorporated into the convention center. So they're not saying don't change it, they're just saying don't tear them down. I don't know if that's maybe where the misconception was coming at.
Yeah, I don't think anyone from the Historic Preservation Trust would argue that we need to stop this project. That's not our goal. Our goal is to ask the developers to consider adaptive reuse of the structure. It is in the conservation district. It has good bones, as they say. It is a historic property that's at an important gateway corner into the city, coming from the north. You know, the Historic Preservation Trust advocate for maintaining the historic character of our city. That doesn't mean that we pick a time period and we stop. It means that what we try to do is preserve what we can to build upon to create the next phase of our city's landscape history.
Could I also say something to Josh's point? You know, there have been loads and loads of studies done that show that if you're interested in economic development in your city, the smaller scale properties of the nature, like this tavern, for example, are eminently more suitable for development that isn't dependent on major external investors. So these kinds of buildings foster local self-reliance for, you know, average people who may want to start a business, just for example. So there are lots of studies that demonstrate that the economic impacts of saving this scale of building. The other point that I wanted to make is that it's the irony of our district is that we have more buildings intact of the type that my grandparents, your grandparents, average people live their lives in. It's the big fancy stuff that people get fixated on, the architecture of the 1%. But the reality is the type of building that we're talking about, although it may not look fancy to us, was actually really, really central to the lives of people who lived here, us, right? People who were like us. And so I think that there is an ethical argument to make. I'm not going to make it tonight, but I think that there's an ethical argument to make for honoring this kind of built landscape, urban landscape. Ironically, this is precisely the landscape that is the most vulnerable. It's considered expendable, the way working class people are considered expendable. That's where the morality of this is. So I think we really need to take this very, very seriously. It also happens that the people who live along Frederick Street it's largely a transient neighborhood, right? It's not largely, those buildings are not by and large owned by people who live in them. So I think that that's another dimension to this problem that we're looking at, is who gets to control urban space. Largely, it's not the people who actually live in that, in those spaces. So I think there are lots of maybe invisible issues that are wrapped into this project. Just to go back to what Art was saying earlier, you know, the city has really bent over backwards to accommodate LGH. And you know, LGH controls a really substantial footprint in the city now. And I think this is a policy issue that we have to start thinking about, an urban policy issue as well as a planning issue.
And if I may add in regard to what Josh mentioned, you know, it is an interesting question between should we try to save this property or let LGH have its way? And I would just encourage us to think back and realize LGH acquired this property in 2003. They've had a plan for this block. They've assembled the land to do a project. And we can just say, okay, go ahead and build, and we'll get out of your way. Or we can see the value, and I think many of us, I came from England in 1960. I've lived in the city ever since. I love places like this in the city. Rehabbed older buildings that serve a neighborhood that people walk to, see their neighbors, it's special. This would not be replicated by something that the hospital does as part of this project. They may try to do that, but there's something special about older buildings that are restored and kept with a history. It makes our city much more livable. It improves the quality of life. And it is very hard to convince some people that don't see that, or that they want to do a big project. And our goal, I hope our goal is to convince the hospital that this is the right thing to do for the city. And we have done a lot. The hospital's been great for the city. It provides a lot of jobs. I don't think anybody here is saying that's not true. It's important to our town, but our town is important to LGH as well. And we're just trying to get some attention as we support the majority of the project. We're trying to get their attention to something that we feel is extremely important to us and to the city. And that's the message we hope we can convince LGH to do the right thing.
Thank you, Art. Very well said. If I could just interject, this group of 14, 15 people sent a letter to City Council and the mayor on October 30th and said, this is what we believe, this is what we care about. Saw the pictures of all these other things that have been recycled appropriately into the city. Jamie Arroyo is the only person who contacted me. I'm not sure if he contacted anybody else, but he contacted me and said, we should reach out to you guys, Neighbors United, to see what kind of dialogue we could get flowing here. After our letter went to LGH, the only other person from city representative who contacted me was Janet Diaz. She said, I hear what you're saying. I'm on board with what you're caring about. And she's an LGH employee. And I asked her, could you please ask LGH what they believe they've done to reach out to the community to have a dialogue about the impact of this project and to kind of gauge the situation of the citizens involved. And she said she would. So that's just wanted to share with you, that's the level of feedback we've had so far.
Randy, if I could interject on some of the points that Joshua and Art have made. This is Tim Smetic, former director of the Historic Preservation Trust. I think with the adaptive use of the building, it's a good sell. Many things could happen with that. It could become an office. It could become another neighborhood tavern, coffee house, legal office, accounting office, or something that would give back to the neighborhood. It would employ a few people. And my sense is there are funds available, especially from places like the Community First Fund, who gets millions of federal dollars to actually establish small businesses in areas like this, and also features minority ownership. I would suggest that we could suggest to the developer in LGH that the dialogue between Community First Fund and them would be a good starting point, and then bring in the Lancaster Alliance Economic Development Corporation. There are potential partnerships that could bring in money. to make this happen. And that's what happened with Stevens and Smith project. We had partnerships that helped us out, and there's been other instances of that in the city. In terms of what the mayor wrote in yesterday's paper, I guess, he emphasized one of their priorities was to engage the community in all their projects. And I know that's the mayor's projects, but this is a sizable project that will involve city approvals. So to be consistent in her message, I think to involve the community, such as what we're doing here, is vital to making sure everybody's input is heard. And finally, in terms of precedent, I ran a capital campaign into a different township, which is outside Philadelphia, about 10 years ago. And my biggest donor was Penn Medicine. And specifically, who made that happen was the current president of Penn Medicine. So there's a precedent for Penn Medicine supporting historic preservation. Not to pull any strings there, but there is a precedent that we could talk to Jan Bergen about that they do in fact support historic preservation and adaptive use. So just some things to think about.
Yeah, if I could, I guess, touch on Linda's comments. I really appreciate the economic development piece of it. And it absolutely drives me nuts that the Fulton Tavern has been vacant for as long as it has. Not just because the architecture of it is historical, but the actual use of it. And it was designed to be a walkable tavern. And it's within a quarter mile in the Northeast. It's really supposed to be the meeting place for the Northeast. And I would love to see a time where Neighbors United has their meetings right there in the Fulton Tavern. It would have a cultural, economic, all the other benefits, and it would keep the guys from selling heroin in the parking lot out of there. That would be a real benefit. This one, and I don't know if I'm missing the point, but this one is down the street from a substation. The street wall has been destroyed. The street wall across the street won't exist. And having even 3 baseball games a week is not enough. I mean, the other restaurants up the block struggle because the baseball stadium itself serves food.
Yeah, I think
I don't think this one gets preserved as a neighborhood tavern the same way hopefully the Fulton does. And not because I don't think historic preservation isn't important, but I don't think this neighborhood, unfortunately, is any longer historically preserved, if you will.
I'm not sure that's a really fair estimation of the future of this neighborhood, because I think we all are anticipating an LGH development that does bring in 500 more residents, right? 230 units, you're going to have not just one human in each place. And the synergy, that's going to drag the downtown another 2 blocks north. Having all that commercial development on the street there in Queen. So instead of, the commercial district stopping at James Street, it's going to come up 2 more blocks. And so the social and economic environment of that historic tavern is going to be radically different 5 years from now than it was the past 5 years.
On the corner of a state highway, US 222 South, right across the street from the baseball stadium. I know the baseball stadium could be more active, Josh, you're right, but it's not the location of the Fulton Bar. This is a state highway, baseball stadium in the midst of a medical complex, which extends from the behavioral center on Harrisburg Avenue to Lime Street. The whole complex of earning potential there that this is in the center of.
Yeah, and I guess as we as a city try to balance the needs for housing, and just unfortunately, this isn't the only building that's being demolished by neglect. And I guess if we go 2 blocks further north, there's the Gunhauser Bakery. I I anticipate we'll be having similar conversation. I really hope that one day we're having similar conversations and that just doesn't sit vacant for another decade or so. But I guess, do you guys view that project similarly? And would the goal be to try and preserve that as well?
Well, you got to look at every one of those particular kinds of things in big context. Let's talk about Charter Homes was going to move in there with their headquarters. They were sold a bill of goods by Charlie Smithgall, who said, we'll give you everything you want to move into this building, but never mentioned the toxic issues in the ground, in and around that, in the previous use of that particular structure. And that really did a number on the viability of Charter Homes 10, 20, whatever years ago. So there's all kind of issues at play in these kinds of urban redevelopment kinds of settings. And we really have to look at a broad scope of understanding of how we got to where we are from way back when.
It is absolutely case by case.
Yes, and let me finish, Gene. If I could finish.
Oh, sure.
You remember that thing was going to be redeveloped by BlackRock Development. And that was probably going to be where the Chamber of Commerce was going to go. But instead, because of these things that were brought up about the issues of toxics, they relocated East King Street and did that hub that they have there now. So things tend to move around and we never know how they're going to play out because we're not at the table where the people who are putting these capital investments in the ground are making the same level of decisions. And so there's all kind of, unknowns at this time.
But I wanted to add, though, that each time, if we lose more historic buildings, it's going to be harder to save that next one. So I think it's a very different case, the building that you mentioned, the Gunzenhauser Bakery building, Josh. But if we lose all of these buildings on this site, it makes it even harder that the precedent is gone for trying to save other buildings on other sites.
And I for one, am not ready to turn my back on the Northeast, and say that here's a place where we can just have free reign for development without regard for the conservation district that so many people so many years ago struggled to create to try to help us preserve some kind of sense of identity in our city.
Danielle, was there another point you wanted to make? I noticed you have the raised hand icon up. Are you wanting to speak? Do you want to unmute and?
I was, but that was a little bit ago.
Okay, sorry, I didn't notice that at the
Oh,
time.
no, that's fine. That's fine.
One of the important things here is and I agree with Gene, every project is unique. What this project needs, like all the other projects I've been involved in, is an advocate. And I would think LGH should be the biggest advocate here. They could bring in other partners, as I mentioned. It could be the Historic Preservation Trust as the chief advocate, or any other organization. But I think LGH is in its best interest to be the advocate here and bring together partnerships to discuss what you could adaptively use. If you leave it sit, nothing will happen. You need an active advocate to make things happen.
Yeah, and I guess I would like to thank you guys for making the point about the building, the context, the future of the block. I guess I had not really been thinking that all the way through. And yeah.
Yeah, I think if we could preserve that building but still maintain all those residential units, even if it isn't used as a tavern, it would be a good thing to do. I guess I would like to see the difference in price estimates because I don't imagine it would be that substantial of a, and this is me naively speaking, but in the context of a project this size, I can't imagine keeping that tiny building on the corner around would be that big of a deal.
And that's pretty much what the Historical Commission said to the developer at the last meeting, Tim, was, well, why don't you show us that this is so difficult or not? Is there a way to do it? That's what we'd like to see.
I know we're coming up on 2 hours, and what is it? The mind can only absorb what the seat can withstand.
Yes.
Any parting shots from the group? I'd like to thank everybody for coming out this evening. This has been a great turnout. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, Tim. I would like to solicit, if possible, are there any questions that anybody would like us to take to LGH when we have our meeting next week?
Randy, could Trust be invited to the meeting?
I will ask. The last time I broached the subject, we have 3 people who are attending that meeting, and that's Jean Weglarz, Eugene Aleci, and me. And that was kind of arbitrary. And I asked if there could be some other people attending, and they said they wanted to keep it to a minimum.
Okay.
So I can ask if you could attend and see what they say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
My understanding is LGH was invited to this meeting. Is that right, Tim?
Randy, you had emailed LGH and let them know that this meeting was going on. Correct?
Yeah. Our request to have a meeting with them coming up on the 17th of the month next week notified them that we were going to be getting together with you guys at the behest of Councilman Arroyo. And I let it up to them to, decide whether anybody wanted to spend time and join in.
I'd like you to ask them how come no one turned up.
Seems like a fair question.
Okay, we'll ask.
Would we have something from the Preservation Trust? I mean, I get a general sense that there's a positive feeling for our position that these buildings ought to be saved if there's a way. Are you going on record in any fashion? Will you be attending the December 21st meeting of the Historical Commission, et cetera?
Yes, we are intending to make a statement concerning this project, which is one of the reasons why I was hoping to meet with LGH2 to get the developer side of this before we move forward.
Well, we'll certainly ask. Randy will ask. I hope they would agree.
Did you send your letter to LGH or
no? We're going to be writing a letter, most likely to the Historic Commission. But the executive board meets later this week, and the issue will be taken up there.
Okay. But in the meantime, I'll send a note to the folks and ask if you can attend that meeting.
Thank you very much, Randy.
Sure.
It would probably be one representative, Jim or Danielle, or.
Well, I'm now the chair of the Preservation Action Committee, so I would prefer that it would be me. But if Danielle is an excellent advocate, of course, so should be, if she could make it and I couldn't, that would be fine too.
Okay.
I once chaired that committee about 20 years ago when I was on that board.
And I'll just say that any neighbors that have additional feedback for any of the groups represented, either reach out to them yourselves, or if you need to filter information through us, reach out to us via the Neighbors United email addresses or Facebook pages or anything, and we'll get you contacted with the correct folks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. As I mentioned, we will be recording. This has been recorded, and we'll get this posted up on YouTube, share it on Facebook. Feel free to share it as far and wide as you'd like. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, have a great evening.
Thank you.
Hey, good to see you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Arf, arf.